Welcome to Shield Maidens, Women of the Norse World, the podcast that celebrates the remarkable women of the Viking Age. From fierce warriors and powerful queens to wise seers and cunning goddesses, these women left an indelible mark on history. Join authors Johanna Wittenberg and K.S. Barton each month as we explore the stories, achievements, and impact of Norse women. Welcome to Shield Maidens, Women of the Norse World. This is episode 33, in which Johanna and I welcome back archaeologist Margrethe Havgar. Margaret joined us for our October episode, where we talked about the Oseberg burial and tapestries in general. And then she also told us about her research project with the Oseberg tapestries. And today we'll be talking more in depth about her PhD project with those tapestries. We'll be getting a before look into what she's doing. And then in the future, when she's finished, we'll check back in for an after. And we're really excited to have her on again. I'm K.S. Barton, author of the Norse Family Trilogy, in which a young Viking woman and a Viking warrior are caught in a deadly blood feud between two brothers. And with me is Johanna Wittenberg. Hi, Johanna.
Hello. I'm Johanna Wittenberg, author of the Norse Women series, which is the story of a real Norse queen who ruled alone in the early 9th century, the dawn of the Viking Age.
So real quick bio before we get going. Margrethe Havgar is an archaeologist based in Oslo. She has more than 10 years of experience in disseminating archaeology, including in museums, at excavations, and online. Her main areas of interest include Scandinavian Iron Age art, Viking Age storytelling, and how history is both created and used in our current time. She is currently working on a PhD project focused on re-illustrating and reanalyzing the decorated textiles from the Oseberg burial in light of the rest of the art from the same burial. This project is part of the larger text research project at the Museum of Cultural History of Oslo. And she is also a co-host of the Nordic Mythology podcast with Daniel Farrand. Welcome back, Margaret.
Hi, and so nice to be back. I'm really excited to really dig into, what I'm spending most of my time nerding out about.
We can't wait to hear about it.
And we're happy to nerd out with you.
It's so great. I mean, I've got to say, I feel very privileged to be able to have the Oseberg as, my research material, because if you even know a little bit about, Scandinavian history, the Viking Age, what have you, I don't really need to pitch it to people, even if they have one single, then I'm like good to go. Well, I have, colleagues who do amazing research who have to they have to pitch it a bit more to get people interested, even though we all understand that it is interesting. I don't really have to work for it that much.
True. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, they
What's
just
not
moved
to like
the
about-
Oseberg ship, didn't they?
Yes, they did. I have to. It was they're building this, or they're expanding the already existing museum out at Big Day, and they had this ingenious idea, and I say that very sincerely, the ingenious idea to stream the moving of the Oseberg ship. Also because here, domestically in Norway, there's been a big hoo-ha made about how expensive this project is. But the thing is, the reason it is so expensive is because the ships and many of the other artifacts are so incredibly difficult to move. So it's been a feat of engineering for the past, I think, 7 years at least, to figure out how to even get them into the new expanded museum. And I gotta admit, I didn't watch all of it because it was literally 10 hours because it moved extremely slowly. But it was fun to see.
I saw the truncated or telescope version of it.
They time lapsed it. Yeah. Yeah. It's quite amazing to see, and it's fun how it gets people engaged too. Even my little sister, who is by no means really much an archaeology nerd at all, she's like, that's your area of expertise. Even she texted me being like, the ship is 40 centimeters away from the ground now. They're lowering it. Make sure you're watching. And I'm like, whoa, okay, cool. Even you're into this. Fun.
Well, back to your project. I had to get that in there though because it was such an exciting moment.
It is an exciting moment. And it was also really cool to kind of get one of the first official glimpses into what will also become, the tapestry's new home. I don't know exactly
Yes.
where they're going to be exhibited, but that is where they will be at some time in the future, where we'll all be able to visit them. So I don't know how many of them will be there. I don't know which ones are, fit to be exhibited because so many of them are extremely fragile. But, some will definitely be there and will be visible
I do
again.
remember the last time I was there, it was so exciting just to see the real fragments of the real tapestry, but they're
Mm-hmm.
very small.
They are very small. They range from, I gotta apologize. I've been, doing this in metrics, so I unfortunately won't be able to give you the like measurements in inches.
It's fine.
But I think the biggest fragments range from, and here I'm talking about like the what I call the figured ones, meaning the ones that have
Mhm.
depictions of creatures of some sort, because that's my area of expertise. The largest pieces of those tapestries are maybe at most 20 by 30 centimeters. So they're not very big at all. And
Yeah.
the smallest can be like are less than 1 by 5 centimeters. So when I'm saying like fragments, I mean fragments.
Well, and actually, even the finished pieces were not very tall. They were long and kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah, but that's the
is that right?
interesting thing. That's the interesting thing because from what we know about um the way tapestries and stuff, there are not that many mentions of it in sagas and Old Norse texts, as far as I am aware. But when they are mentioned, that is kind of the indication that we get. But truth be told, and I had a meeting with a conservator, Hanna Lukasova at the University of Bergen earlier today. What's really interesting about these tapestries is that that's what we kind of imagine. But the truth of the matter is that the Oseberg tapestries are the only ones left from the Viking Age that we know for sure are from the Viking Age. We have the Overhögdal tapestry from Sweden, but the dating on that tapestry is very unsure for a number of really good reasons. So it might be from like the very, very end of the Viking Age, but probably more likely early Middle Ages. And that seems to fit exactly what you just described, Joanna. But we don't really know what the Oseberg tapestry pieces would have looked like completely. We assume that they would have been, elongated strips. That's
Okay.
also
But
what
that's
the
how I've
Are
always
sizes.
you
seen them.
That's
are you
that's what they seem to indicate, but none of them are intact. None of
Mhm.
them are complete pieces. So we don't know exactly how many pieces we're talking about, and we don't know the original size of them.
so when you say elongated, I'm picturing like a table runner.
Sure.
Is that kind of what you're
Yeah,
picturing?
I
Okay,
guess.
size
Yeah,
wise. Okay.
I would just maybe, yeah. Yeah, maybe. I mean, Table Runner is a good one. But then again, the Overhögdal tapestry is the one closest in age, but the one that is most like often um compared or usually mentioned in the same setting as the Oseberg tapestries, because it depicts a verified historical event from the late Viking Age, is the Bayeux tapestry. And the Bayeux tapestry, on the other hand, while you could compare it to a table runner, it would be a table runner for giants. It is huge. It has
It
that
is.
same rectangular shape, but it is absolutely massive. You could wallpaper your house with that tapestry.
But it also is figurative and tells a story like the
Exactly.
Oseberg.
And
Uh,
that's where it's, a very interesting, that's where it becomes like a very interesting piece of comparison, or at least, in the same area, I would suppose, as the Oseberg tapestries. But then again, the Bayeux tapestry is absolutely not from the Viking Age. It is from the
right.
Middle Ages, but it's depicting something earlier that happened, centuries ago at that time. But it gives us an indication that there was a tradition for what I like to call storytelling in tapestries. But then again, as soon as you say storytelling, that's when I also get a bit pedantic, because I'm like, but what is storytelling? What do we mean? Are we talking about actual historical events like on the Bayeux tapestry? Are we talking about, folk tales? Are we talking about mythology? Are we talking about none of the above? Are we talking about something completely different?
Or all of the above.
Or all of the above at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we really don't know about the Oseberg,
Yep.
is what is it depicting?
Exactly. And that's kind of that kind of gets to the heart of the project that I'm working on now, because
Yay!
Yeah, what a great segue. Yay for
yes,
us.
sometimes I'm able to do it. Oh, that was really satisfying. It's because before we can even get to determining, one, if we're even talking about storytelling, and two, if so, is it possible to ascertain what kind of storytelling we're talking about? Before we even get to all that, we need to figure out what we're even looking at. Because,
Exactly.
without knowing what we're looking at, it's kind of hard to answer those two questions. In the last episode when we talked, we got into it a little bit, but I kind of want to rewind and start from the beginning a little bit. So
Please.
I've mentioned, previously, that there are a lot of fabulous drawings and illustrations. I switch between drawing, sketch, and illustration, kind of depending on what I feel fits. I know they're not necessarily synonymous in all cases, but just for your listeners to know that when I say illustration, drawing, or sketch, I'm pretty much talking about the same thing. It's like it's a visualization made in the modern day of the tapestry pieces. So there are a lot of these fabulous drawings that exist that were made in the first half of the 20th century. The thing was, I thought that there were more of them than there turned out to be. Again, I still haven't been able to verify if I've found all of them, because in typical, museum, archive, library fashion, as time moves on and stuff gets reorganized and people retire or die, systems change. So none of these drawings are archived exactly the same place. So I've had like a real hunt to try to track them down. But when I started tracking them down and comparing these, we have some lists that are also kind of hard to navigate and figure out, like how many, like which fragments are supposedly tapestry and which are not. Like I was trying to figure out how many of these pieces am I going to be looking at? How many are there in total at all? And which ones are relevant for what I'm trying to do? I had already like narrowed down a list to about 40, no, it was more than that, around 80 or 90 catalog numbers. I think I also mentioned that briefly last time, but I'm going to say it again. So like I switched between saying fragments and catalog numbers, but I should really be saying catalog numbers, because the thing is that two textile pieces can have the same catalog number because maybe they've fallen apart since they got that number. So the amount of fragments we have at any given time is always going to be uncertain because they keep decomposing. I can see that you're like already like, oh, Johanna.
I'm just thinking about them just disintegrating. It's like kind of shocking.
It's horrifying.
It is horrifying, but that's also like, I won't go on too much of a tangent here, but like it is horrifying, but at the same time, maybe I'm just a bit like defeatist or poetic, like romantic, I don't know, but like it's also kind of beautiful in a way. Like it's not that I want them to disintegrate, but it just goes to show that like nothing ever completely remains, which I think is awesome, because then we get to like redo things and we get to figure stuff out anew. But that again means that there's a clock on figuring out what we're doing before they go away. Again, I'm not sitting here saying that the Oseberg tapestries are about to completely fall apart and blow away to dust. It's not at all what I'm saying. Just want to put that out there.
That would actually be kind of a cool story idea.
That would be
archaeologist
really cool...
who really has to, like, these are like falling apart, like as we
Facing the clock.
speak, or somebody is doing something, and the
That is a
archaeologist
very
has
cool story
to
idea.
fix it and get it all cataloged and
Yeah.
drawn and stuff before it's gone.
I mean, if and either of you want it, take it. Be like absolutely be my
Go
guest.
for it,
Like
Kim. It's your idea.
I have way more ideas than I have time.
oh, I feel that. I feel that. I was just suddenly like, oh no, I hope there's not going to be like some sort of news outlet that goes, archaeologist says Oseberg tapestries are about to disappear. And I was like, oh no, oh no,
No, they're not.
oh no. But I'd made this list of like tentative catalog numbers. Like I had a tentative amount. And then I started going through all the drawings that I knew of and trying to hunt down ones that I figured existed, but I didn't know of. And I found quite a few. But then I started comparing the drawings to the amount of fragments that I had. And I very quickly realized that a lot of the fragments that were on my list that were relevant to me didn't have drawings. And then meaning that like when I was looking at, these extremely high resolution images that the project I'm a part of had captured of the fragments, I didn't really know that what I was looking at. I was just looking at a bunch of genuinely varying amounts of brown threads overlapping. So I was like, okay, but then how will my project be, a comprehensive reanalysis if I have to scrap all of like more than half of the museum catalog numbers on my list because I don't have a visualization? But you'd think that that's what got me to start experimenting with drawing them. It's not. what happened was, because I am I think my parents would fondly call me a bit of a smartass and a know-it-all. I started reading, there's been a lot of interpretations made of these tapestry pieces, and a lot of these interpretations are made based on these drawings. And I will say, like, I think the drawings are absolutely incredible. I can't imagine being an artist sitting there in 1916, probably maybe like with a magnifying glass, but sitting next to the piece and having to just like look at it and then draw what you see. And in a lot of them, the threads themselves have actually been drawn. Like they've drawn everything.
What are the threads made out of? Are they wool?
In most, yes, in most cases, as in the case of the tapestries, as far as I'm aware, they seem to all be wool.
Okay.
And there are also patches in certain areas that are kind of inexplicably not hollow, but they're like inexplicably gone. Like stuff has been it's kind of just evaporated. So like you can see an outline of something because there's wool thread around it, and then there's a patch. And it's just gone. And we don't really know why that's the case, but we assume that the threads in those types of patches could potentially have been plant-based fibers, so like linen or something. And for some reason, plant-based fibers had a harder time being conserved in those conditions than animal fibers like wool. As far as I'm aware, there have been multiple fiber analyses of the threads, and the ones that I can remember off the top of my head has shown at least that there is goat wool that we're talking about. So not sheep, but goat. But again, I think those results from the 50s or 60s, that doesn't make them any less, real or relevant. I just don't know if there have been updated results that show different things. But the me being kind of a smartass and a know-it-all, and perpetually questioning everything all the time, which is exhausting but also fun. I started reading these interpretations, and on the whole, I would say I mostly think that all of them are great. But there were a couple where I thought that they just went. Gonna make me sound so unprofessional, but let's just go for it. I felt like they just kind of went ass over tea kettle with how they'd interpreted the drawings. So I'm not criticizing the drawing, but I'm criticizing the interpretation made based off of the drawing. Where on one of the fragments there is a very large something or other happening in front of what seems to be very clearly a horse. And on the drawing, it looked like some sort of maybe a skirt, and then there was something that could potentially be a weird sort of very small tiny torso with a pointy-eared or horned maybe head question mark. And this has been interpreted as a sort of goddess-like figure.
I know which one you mean.
Yes. And I went, what the are we talking about? I'm sorry, I suddenly don't remember if I have a foul mouth. So I stopped myself there. But I went like, like, I might be inclined to agree, but like, show me your work. How did we get from that to here? What happened between there? And that's when I started going, what? Is that really what we're looking at? Is that really what's happening here? And I also I started getting really curious because this sort of maybe torso head didn't have any indication of like an eye or anything. And a lot of the at least the humanoid figures on these specific tapestries from the Oseberg burial almost always have eyes. If there's a head, there is usually always an eye. So I was like, okay, what is happening here? And slowly but surely, I started kind of just playing around with the idea of sketching more and more. Didn't really think that this would become part of my actual project. But after one of my supervisors, also kind of unrelated to this, just kind of offhand mentioned like maybe we should try to like draw on top of these images now that we have them, now that we finally have these great images, and see what we see. And initially I went, I don't know. But then that stuck with me, added with, my own sort of growing uncertainty of how I would even use the existing drawings, and also not having drawings for a lot of the material that I thought would be relevant. I just kind of started playing around with the idea of trying to draw them myself on my laptop, because I'm fortunate enough to have a laptop with a touchscreen and a pencil, or a pen. So I had a subscription to the Adobe Cloud, and I downloaded this program called Fresco, which was pitched as an easier version of Illustrator. I was like, okay, Illustrator is way too complicated for me, but maybe Fresco is something that I could figure out how to use. And I uploaded a compressed version of one of the high-res images to Fresco, and just started kind of playing around with what tools do we have here, like what can I do. So I started I'd done a couple of courses on textile techniques, ancient textile techniques, and kind of had gotten way more familiar with what this textiles look like when they've been buried or preserved for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then in this software, Fresco, hashtag not sponsored by Adobe by any means. I'm just being honest about what tools I use.
I wish.
Yeah, I wish. And that would have saved me a little bit of cash. But anyway, I started playing around with what tools there were, and I suddenly found this button called a hue settings, and I was like, oh, well, what does that do? And they had a bunch of colored sliders and everything. And I was like, oh, I wonder what happens if I slide this slider over here. And then the color of the whole image just completely changed. And I went, wow. Wait, what? And then I slowly realized that by changing the hue settings, I was changing how the software read specific colors of the image. And I quickly realized that the only colors that were relevant in the case of the preserved Oseberg textiles was red and yellow. There aren't any greens really. And there aren't any blues that is, clearly conserved enough for the software to pick up on that. So I started using, changing this hue scale on the settings for red and yellow. And in a lot of cases, I suddenly ended up with a visualization of the fragment that showed a lot more contrast than what's visible to the naked eye, even in the high-res images.
That is without so cool.
yeah, without any of these settings having been done. So I went, okay, well then what do I end up with if I then color in all of these contrasts? So I was like, just kind of, okay, what colors are easy for me to see? All right, let's go with like some sort of like a salmon pink red type thing and a lime green, I guess. So, okay, this whole layer, everything that appears of kind of yellowish on this layer, I'll color as a salmon color. And then everything that appears as like a more vibrant red, I'll color that lime green and put them in different layers. And then when I'm done, I'll compare and contrast what I've got. And that's what I started doing, literally like a kid with a coloring book, but without the lines in the coloring book. I just started doodling. And I quickly realized that my eyes also got very used to differentiating between the warp and the weft, meaning that the warp threads being the background threads is what I call them kind of vernacularly. So, like the threads that are fastened to the loom, and then the wefts are the ones that are then woven and are what make the motifs. So I was able to kind of slowly but surely pick out what contrast, like the colors that I saw, which ones were potentially actual tapestry figures and which ones were remaining warp threads. So threads that wouldn't necessarily have been visible at all. It would have been on the back side of the tapestry. So that wouldn't then be relevant in most cases. And I just kind of started doing that. And after a while, I started realizing that, wait a minute, this is what I should do with all the ones I don't have drawings for.
Yeah.
So that's what I started doing. Now, mind you, part of this process wasn't just that I was coloring in. After I also found out that I could, I put all those colored layers in a group. Sometimes I got so many varying, like contrasting things happening all at once that I wanted to have more than just two contrasting colors when I was trying to sketch this out. So I had yellows and blues and everything just to be able to be like, okay, but if I color all of this in a lime green, then I won't be able to pick out the differences between them. And then when that stage was done, I put all of those colored layers in a group, and I faded them down so that they would be visible, but they wouldn't overshadow the actual image of the fragment. So I changed the transparency of them. And then I took off the hue settings, so the fragment then appeared as it would be originally. And with the somewhat transparent coloring layers, I use those then as a basis to doodle outlines of figures. And I realized that I am actually getting good results. This is actually giving me a lot of stuff. And I did this a couple of times with fragments that I knew that I had drawings of so that I could compare them and know whether or not if I was just way off base, if this was actually just not giving me usable results at all. And it turned out that no, I'm pretty much drawing exactly what the previous drawings show me, with some differences here and there. Sometimes, a thread has been loosened since 1916 until, 2025. That turns out that happens. And then I started, just kind of almost a little bit disregarding my compiled list because I got so into it that I was like, I have to see how many of these pieces I can get any sort of results out of, just to figure out if there were other, fragments that previously hadn't been cataloged as tapestry pieces, but that potentially could be. But I will say, for the most part, the ones that have been logged as tapestry pieces are tapestry pieces. They're not necessarily still, it's not necessarily possible to say what they're showing because they're just too degraded or they're too fragmented. And the ones that aren't cataloged as tapestry pieces usually are absolutely not tapestry pieces. So I've kind of I've been able to verify, not that I was questioning it, but just, in the name of solid research, I was able to verify that the lists that were compiled, in the in the late 1910s and the early 1920s are, I would say, pretty solid. So that
Wow.
was good to kind of get that out of the way too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And how long would it take you to do like a fragment that way?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question, Kim, because it's so easy to answer. No, no. It can take me anywhere from, if I'm really, really lucky and I have a piece that isn't super big, isn't super what should I say? Scuffed up in in like a better term, but that's still fairly like clear, isn't super thready. And the hue settings are also give me very clear contrasting, you know, results. If I'm really lucky there, it can take me maybe 5 hours to do sketch. In most cases, I would guesstimate. I haven't really timed myself. I've done some time lapses, just it's fun to see how I work, but I'd say in most cases it takes me anywhere from, for including also like tracing the actual edges of it, making the full sketch, double checking everything. I'd say it takes me anywhere from 15 to 30 or 50 hours to do a
Wow.
Wow.
sketch.
Wow.
But the reason also it's hard for me to kind of accurately put a number on it is because I've also noticed after doing this for, I've been doing this on and off for 3 years now, that for a lot of them, I usually I try to leave one fragment and have a bit of a break or switch over to another sketch of another fragment after I've finished the coloring layers, because I've just noticed that I get a bit, first of all, I get exhausted
Yeah.
because I'm
I bet.
looking at it so intently and I'm like zooming in and out and I'm like coloring and then I erase and I redo it. And then sometimes I mix up the layers and I have to like redo stuff. But then also that I get so wrapped up in the details that I'm a bit, I want to make sure that I haven't gotten a weird form of like blind, like that there's no type of blindness that's occurred, because sometimes that can happen, especially when I'm coloring, that I think I'm seeing things because my brain is also logging all of these patterns, right?
Right.
Unconsciously. So I'm like, oh, this is probably that. Uh and then I'm like, you know what? I think I after I'm done with coloring all of this, I'm gonna put this away for a while. I'm gonna jump over into another sketch so that I don't so that my brain doesn't start to make connections that potentially aren't there.
Right.
But this is all stuff like this process. The way that I've structured this in a word is unstructured. Like this process has developed, I would say, completely organically. I've literally just gone with the flow and figured out what works. And after a while, also recently, I've realized that it's also really important when I use these sketches that I've made to point out that I am not like the colors here are not depicting actual dyes,
Right.
not
Right.
what it would have looked like. But also, it struck me as I was doing a conference at Midgard Viking Center last year. I was showing people, preliminary sketches that I'd done at that point, and it suddenly occurred to me using like red and green as the contrasting colors is like not the most accessible, maybe for colorblind people.
Oh.
So maybe I should think about redoing that. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. I haven't been able to make a ton of nuance on that end, but it's something that I'm definitely thinking about. But yeah, I'd say for a fairly easy peasy one, somewhere between 5 to 10 hours. Most cases, probably somewhere between 20 to 50 hours per
Wow.
sketch. Yeah.
That's a lot.
But
I
yeah, it
understand
is.
what you mean about the blindness. Like Johanna, you probably understand this too. Like when we're writing,
Yeah.
when you get so involved in a story and the characters and the plot and everything, and then there's always a time, at least for me, I have to walk away from it.
Yeah.
because then it's just like I know everything that's going on and I know what's going on in
Mm-hmm.
my characters' heads, but unless I walk away from it and come back to it with some fresh eyes, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't work, or I didn't explain that very well, or whatever. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
totally get that kind of artistic blindness when you just start, you know what you're looking at and what you're
Yeah.
doing, and then if you take a little break and you come back with some literally fresh eyes.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's really necessary. So I'm
Yeah, it
really
is.
curious, how much of this does the computer do, and how much do you do, or I should say the software do? And what I mean is, so you're using a stylus?
Yeah, so I've switched over because my dear old, it's not that old, but my dear old computer is meant to be a computer and not a sketching tablet. So I started noticing after a while that I there was a while there for, a good solid few months where I didn't sketch at all because I noticed that my computer just kept crashing every time I opened a program. Like it was just
Like,
it was
It's
it was
tired.
tired with a capital T. And I went back and forth and I was like, oh, should I invest in an iPad? Should I do it? Should I actually do it? And then I did it, and it's the best decision I've ever made.
oh,
It like
good.
I think it cut my workflow in half because I didn't have to wait for the software to reboot, and then there was less lag. But yes, I use a stylus, and now an iPad. So all of the sketches that I'm doing are being, most of them have been started on my Microsoft Surface Book, but they're all being completed on an iPad.
So how much, I'm just curious, you're talking about your visualization and getting and seeing things that aren't there, and you
Mm-hmm.
know, delusional almost from
Sure.
over concentrating. How much of this does the software pick up as opposed to you having to define it? Huh, I'm just curious. So the
Um,
software picks up on contrasts,
well, the
or
software really, sorry, I'll let you finish.
no, I just go ahead. I'm just curious about the process a little bit.
Yeah. So it's I would say that the closest comparison would be, like overheads.
Mhm.
Um
Mhm.
From the old days.
my yeah, my algebra teacher used an overhead consistently. That's all she did. Never used the whiteboard, only overheads. It's if you have like colored overhead sheets and you
Mhm.
put those over the images, that's like the closest comparison I have to what the software does. So when it comes to recognizing patterns and actually figuring out what's happening and tracing it and all of that stuff, that's all me.
Okay,
So
that
so
was pretty much my question.
yeah, because no, but it is a good question though, especially now, in the day and age of AI and machine
Right.
learning and all of that. It's actually an interesting question that you asked that, because I've been also on the side been involved with another part of the TextRec project, this research project that my PhD is a part of, that has been about seeing whether or not we could digitally reassemble these fragment pieces. And what a few colleagues of mine and I, most of us conservators and archaeologists, were fairly convinced about going into this is that we thought that the machine would probably have a hard time understanding the surface texture of
Hmm.
textiles because it's so varied. You have very few what we could call like ground truths or hard truths. Also, just because we couldn't tell the machine what this was supposed to look like, we couldn't tell it that, like, things that are pretty much just disassembled threads would at one point, have been woven together and been a piece like this one, and then showed it another one that wasn't like that at all. But what's been really interesting about that part of the TextRec project was that we haven't been able to reassemble them digitally, kind of
Ah,
like what we expected, but we've now been able to actually say that that is the case, not just speculate. We've tested it out, or I say we. It's my good friend and colleague David Gigliashavi at Antenu in Gjøvik, who's been doing most of this. He's software and computer engineer and gone through so many different stages of this and tried so many different types of software and going through so many of these things. And it turns out that, computers have just as hard a time with textiles that aren't degraded at all. And textiles where we have the complete one, but as soon as we kind of digitally cut it into pieces and tell it reassemble it, here's what it's supposed to look like, it still has a hard time doing that. So I think it comes down to the fact that textiles are just really complicated. They're complicated for us to understand, even with our subjective, human brains. And it's also really difficult for the machine to understand. So
Very interesting.
yeah,
But kind of disappointing.
it is kind of disappointing. But at the same time, we've also been able to, narrow down, if we were to be able to do this, what are the most pressing issues that would need to be solved? And those we didn't know beforehand. Like, we now know that we need more advanced imaging technology to be able to feed the machine more information about the fragments themselves. Like the 2D image has too much information about the fact that this is a 3D object, but then the machine can't put those two things together and figure it out, which I guess is a good thing when it comes to, I don't think there's any danger of like robot overlords anytime soon, but that's a different discussion for a different day. But when it comes to what I do, I would just say that the software is 100% just a tool and does actually, besides visually altering what I'm looking at, it doesn't really give me any results.
Okay.
It's just up to me to figure out.
Cool.
So it's like putting on 3D glasses or colored glasses, pretty much.
No wonder it takes so long.
It takes an insane amount of time.
So one of the examples you sent us, I think we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I'm just really curious. One of the samples you sent us, it looks to me like there are 3 people riding a horse. And
yes.
You confirmed that yes. And I immediately interpreted it as the father, the little kid, and the mother, just from their positions and what they seem to be wearing. But you said, no, we can't, don't get too hasty. But anyway, it's very interesting because I had never seen that anywhere before.
No, I think, first of all, that's also one of the ones where I'm like, whoa. There are definitely 3 people on this horse, actually.
Yeah.
Because when I first discussed this with a colleague way back when, that also makes my my heart warm a little bit, because that was the first ever fragment that I tried to illustrate, the one that you're asking about. So like, it warms my heart. I'm like, oh, that's the one. That's the first one. That's the baby. I have not personified these tapestry fragments at all, I promise. I discussed that with a colleague, and they were like, no, I don't think that's the case. Like, that doesn't make sense. And I was like, I agree that it doesn't make sense, but they're there. But then at that point, the sketch wasn't complete. But the funny thing was that when I originally started sketching that piece, because I thought we didn't have a previous illustration of it. Then I started re-looking just to make sure that, I had all my ducks in a row. And there are a couple, actually. But what was great about that was that I was able to confirm that I had found these 3 figures on my own. But lo and behold, when I found the previous illustrations from like 1917, I think, I was like, oh, Sophie Kraft in 1917 saw them too. They're there.
Wow, cool. So that was not in her book, because she published a book later in the 50s. And that fragment was not illustrated in her book.
It might have been. I just recently checked out her book. It might be, but the thing is that specific fragment, as far as I can understand from all the sources that I have, that fragment is both like given its dues, but also overlooked at the same time, which is weird, because it's very similar to the one called the procession piece, which I would wager is probably the most famous one, given that it's actually the only one that we have an excavation photo of. It's the only one that we know exactly where it was placed in the burial chamber when it was excavated. They really dropped the ball on the documentation on that end, but I think we got into that last time. But that's the one we know for certain where it was placed and where they found it. And it's also one of the ones that is most visible to the naked eye. It's easy to tell what it is. So that's fragment. The name of it is fragment 1-2, and the one that we're talking about now with the 3 people on the horse is fragment 11AB. And 11AB has almost since the beginning been interpreted as probably being a continuation of fragment 1-2.
Right.
So there are a lot of indicators that make it seem likely that these were originally part of the same piece. We haven't been able to verify it, but just stylistically, also from my own work, I'd say that, that wouldn't be an insane claim to make. But on that front, then, I feel like 11AB, the one with the 3 horses, often gets a bit overlooked because it's kind of just pulled into the conversation with 1-2. But 1-2 is so much easier to see. It's so much easier to figure out what's going on there. And when it comes to 11AB also, there's indicators that the side that we're seeing now might actually be the back end, that it might be turned on its head. There are a lot of like little indicators of that. Firstly, the figures are like moving in the opposite direction. I would say that that's not a clear enough indicator in and of itself, because I have multiple fragments with people and horses and other creatures moving in opposite directions. But there are also, from my own sketch also, there are seeming threads that are like, they go way down, kind of like when you would flip something knitted or sewn on its head and then or kind of turn it inside out, and you will see where kind of like all the stuff that you're not supposed to see is fastened.
I had a sweater like that.
Yeah. But I think that's probably one of the reasons why this hasn't really been talked about that much. And also, I will say that without coming off as too much of a pedantic smartass know-it-all, I would say that there are some of the fragments where things that don't just really make sense or fit with our perceived version of what we think the Viking Age would have been, that they just kind of don't talk about it too much. It's just like, this is the headache. So whatever, we'll just show people, the sketch, and they'll make up their minds about it, I guess, or whatever.
Well,
I don't think that's necessarily been the conscious intention, but that's the vibe that I sometimes pick up.
Well, that makes me wonder why the quote unquote goddess one isn't kind of put back on the back burner, because you really can't see anything that looks like a head on that piece.
But then again, a sexy goddess or like a goddess figure is a sexy thing to talk about, because then you can immediately connect it to mythology, and you can connect it to sorcery and scythed and all of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
But 3 people on a horse, that's not, especially if it's
it's
Papa,
like
baby, mama.
Yeah, it's like it's too different but not different enough. Okay. I'm like really giving these past researchers no grace.
That's okay. In some ways they don't deserve it.
No, but then again, I am standing on the back of their research, so I should show them a bit of grace. But I will also just say that there are clear. I'm grateful for the work that they've done, so that I can poke holes in it.
Well, and everybody is a product of their time, too.
Exactly.
So
indeed,
exactly, and that's kind of that's where I come in with what you said earlier, Johanna, with the mother father child interpretation. I don't think that that's an unreasonable interpretation at all, and that's kind of a line of thought that's been very common when it comes to interpreting these tapestry fragments. And I think there's solid foundations for thinking that, but I'm trying to kind of come in at an interpretive angle, if you will, where I'm like, can we actually say for sure that we know what we're talking about when it comes to assigning age and gender identity to humanoid figures made by a society from which we don't really have enough to accurately ascertain exactly what it meant to be the same words that we use today. So, meaning that I'm not opposed to the interpretation that someone wearing, a long piece of garment that could be interpreted as a dress could be a woman. I am just not sure if we use the term woman, does that mean the same thing as what the equivalent term of woman would be in the Viking Age? Today, I would say that being a woman has probably a lot of other connotations and also probably similar ones than it did in the Viking Age. So I just want to take a step back and be a bit like, let's be careful with the words that we use to describe something that isn't actually even showing real people, maybe, but depictions of something.
That we don't even know what that is.
Exactly. No, but this is okay. I'm a big also like theory nerd. So some of my friends and my sister also, I'm sorry, Anna, I'm calling you out a lot in this interview, but can be like, oh my God, no, she's going off about this again. Oh man, here we go. Because I can be like, what do we really know though about anything actually? But I have actually some interesting, things that I'm going to be trying to pick apart and then tentatively try to put back together again as part of this project is that I've actually been able to pretty safely argue that there is an academic blind spot when it comes to interpreting art from the late Iron Age. So, meaning also the Viking Age, but also the centuries prior to the Viking Age, meaning that and that gap is that at a certain point, we just kind of decided that long hair and dress means woman and pants or tunic means man. And no one ever really disputed that enough and for long enough for it to make a dent into what turns out to be just academic tradition and not actually a solid interpretation based off of evidence, if that makes sense.
Well, and especially when there is some evidence for cross-dressing in the Viking Age.
Exactly.
Plus, there's so many other cultures where men wear long robes or, things like that. So it's not necessarily something that's never done.
We don't even have to go further than like 3 centuries after the Viking Age. Nobles and kings in Scandinavia would consistently wear robes.
Well, and in Ireland, they all wore the same tunic, a lane, and they just, men and women, they wore the same garments. The men hoisted them up higher and tucked them in their belts, but they were pretty much the same garment.
Yeah, well, even when we talk about like a masculine, in quotes, way of dressing now, at least in like Europe, European and American and like North American societies. And it's like, well, you go back just a few centuries and look at what the men were wearing, those big wigs and makeup, and they had stockings and high heels.
High heels.
And, it's like, and they were like the ruling class men and stuff. So
that was, peak masculinity at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not like they were not dangerous in a fight.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And that kind of
they weren't
gets
sissies.
to exactly. But that also that gets to like the heart of my thing where I'm like, I'm not necessarily trying to say that we can't use those terms. I'm just trying to say that our categories for what indicates any sort of gender groupings has, historically and famously and are still continuously shifting. So how can we make a claim that is not based on actual evidence and then just kind of hold it as a blanket statement for how an entire culture that spanned what today are several borders and people that, may or may not have been even in touch with each other, that they all interpreted their whatchamacallit, for lack of a better term, gender markers exactly the same way for 3 centuries. That is a ridiculous claim to make because, as you already said, Kim, 3 centuries ago, peak masculinity looked a lot different in Scandinavia and, I would say probably all places than what it does today. So what are we doing?
Mm-hmm. The thing is that, humans just want to make meaning out of things. They just want things to make we just want things to make sense. We want to make meaning. We want like the stories to make sense and to be able. So it's just, it seems so very human to me for people to just be like,
Absolutely.
I just need that to be a man and a woman and a child, please. Just
absolutely. No, but you know what? But here's the thing. I empathize with that a lot because I will say there are so many times where I've been like, where I've been sitting there sketching, I've been like, oh, wait, this is maybe this is actually an eye. And then this could actually be, maybe this thread right here could actually then be a face. Because if then this thread is a face, then that means that I've got a figure here. And then that means that I understand what's going on. And then I take a step back and I'm like, what am I doing? Is this actually, am I actually seeing a face, or am I trying to construct a face because I'm so tired of not understanding what I'm looking at? And if that's the case, I usually go, okay, time to close the iPad, time to save the file, put it away. I'm done for today. Because at that point, my eyes have just gone, I'm just completely cross-eyed and I'm just trying to make sense of stuff because I want it to make sense, not because it actually makes sense. So I think that that's a really good point, Kim. And I understand that and I empathize with that. And I don't think that that's necessarily an inaccurate way to go about things, but I think it becomes inaccurate as soon as you make the claim, but then don't investigate it, or you refuse to question established traditions because it would just be too annoying and difficult for your own work. And if you'll allow me to get, a bit serious here too, I'd also say that particularly at this day and age, I'm also very aware that I'm working on a material from a time period that a lot of people, thankfully, very much a minority of people, not a lot of people, but more than I'm comfortable with, are actively using research and their own interpretations of this time period to perpetuate an idea about a past that would justify recreating a perverted type of society that we never had, but that they claim we had. And because of that, it's okay to take away people's rights and to put people down. And because I belong to communities that would be directly affected by this, I'm very privileged. And I live in Scandinavia, so I probably wouldn't be in that much danger. But also just because I don't think that people deserve to be able to say that because you are this or that, you deserve less human rights than I do. I don't want to be a type of researcher that I want to take my job as a researcher seriously. And I don't want to potentially add more fuel to a fire that's already a little bit out of control in many ways. But I want to make sure that the results that I give have been so thoroughly checked and questioned that if they are in any way misused for that type of purpose, I at least can go, I know that you are just being shitty human beings because that is not what I said. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
We just need to be careful.
Yeah, exactly.
Be careful with that scholarship.
We have to
in
be
a way
careful
that
with
people weren't really before because they weren't thinking. I mean, like I said before, the people are products of their time and
exactly.
their society that they're living in, and so they weren't maybe thinking about some of the things we're thinking about now. And now that
And I
we
think that's yeah.
are taking a lot more into consideration, I think it's a good thing to be careful with that scholarship.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the wonderful thing about scholarship because we get to redo it. We actually
Mhm.
get to be able to sit down and go, huh, okay, I understand where they were coming from a century ago, but we now come from a different time and place. So how would we go about it if we redid this with the way that we see the world now? And we all see the world differently, which is what's so great because that means that we can. I also hope that the work that I do could potentially inspire other people to create their visualizations of the tapestry pieces. Because here's also the thing, I don't think that my sketches are the correct visualizations of the tapestry pieces. I think they are a version of the
A
tapestry pieces.
starting place.
Yeah, not even just a starting place, but just a version.
Mm.
And then you have the other illustrations as well. But the fact of the matter is that they're so literally fragmented and, they're so hard to kind of. It's funny because, in a way, the art that is shown on the tapestry pieces, when you have them visualized, are easier to kind of, in a certain way, figure it like, oh, okay, there's a horse and there's a bird and there are two human figures, for example. While, like, say if you compared it to, those animal head posts from the
Mm.
burial, even though they're more visible to the human eye still, you kind of don't really know what you're looking at because it looks like just a bunch of knotwork, but then suddenly there's a snout and there are eyes and there are fangs. What? And then they're biting each other. What? But where does it start and where does it end? Um, but I hope that, that what I'm doing now is show that, first of all, we have different tools that can give us the same or different results. And secondly, that maybe hopefully other people later would be able to make their own versions because then we have way more material to compare. And maybe then if we put, all these elements together, if we had like 10 different sketches by 10 different people of the same fragments, then it would be much easier to say, but okay, but which elements are repeated in all of them, or are none of them repeated? So like how, yeah, I feel like I went off on a big tangent there, but did that make
No,
sense?
no, no. Yeah, no, that made total sense.
Yeah. But also, one thing that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned about the whole, gender and age thing is that it's not just that I'm being difficult on principle, although that is also very much the case. But it's not just that, but it's that as the more familiar I got with these tapestry pieces, and the more I started drawing them, the more also I noticed. And again, I here want to say very clearly that I, on a personal level, don't necessarily think that gender and your biological body necessarily always have to sync up. But I will say that, considering that aspect, what's interesting about the tapestry pieces is that if you were to try to assign gender, hairstyle slash headdress, because you don't always have what could be
Mm.
interpreted as hair, but hairstyle slash headdress and clothing is literally the only thing you've got to go on. Because
Mhm.
if you were to strip away those types of markers, all of the human figures are pretty cardboard cutout meaning that they're
Mhm.
extremely just, they seem like non-gendered somethings, like stick figures in a way. Not that they look like stick figures, but it's the same type of kind of feeling that it's an approximation of a person, but you can't really say more than it's an approximation of a person because it's just kind of an outline. And there are no indications of, like other types of what we would assume to be gender markers, like, body hair, like facial hair, or, voluptuous forms, or, bulbs in certain areas. There's nothing to give an indication. So, and that's also why I'm a bit like, okay, let's, just do this slowly but surely if we want to do this. Because if clothing is the only thing and hairstyle / headdress is the only thing we have to go on, then that's really great, actually, because then we can go back and try to compare and contrast with what we know from other sources. But just from glancing at them, they're pretty much just outlines of some sort of a maybe human to begin with. So then how much more have we got to go on?
One thing I've always thought about with the tapestry is, so, people have patterned, apparently, like culottes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And patterned shawls, or what look like long shawls.
Yep.
And so I always wondered if the person who did that weaving could recognize their own handiwork in the tapestry. I mean, just a thought that, this is Ursa's shawl. And this is, I mean,
that's just such a good, I love that. I love that a lot.
Because, I think about it, they might do something like that.
Oh, 100%. And what's interesting too is that despite the fact that I said that they're all kind of like cardboard cutouts, that being said, no one person is exactly the same. Then again, this is an organic crafts medium, so it might be because of that, but it's not like they've just copy pasted. There's always
the clothing, the patterns are different.
Yeah, the patterns are different.
Some of the hairstyles.
The hairstyles are different. Sometimes just when you're lucky enough to have a nose, the noses aren't always exactly the same. It's just, there's a lot going on, but also like with the patterns also occur on horses. So I'm like, okay, could this indicate something as like, are we then talking about something as basic as like breeds? But then again, that wouldn't necessarily make sense because the horses are all the same size. Did they paint their horses? Did they paint their horses? Is it an indicator of what they were supposed to communicate in kind of the storyboard of the tapestry? Is it a kind of an ownership thing? I don't know.
I was just gonna say who they belong to, maybe too.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So what's really the final output that do you know what your final output's going to look like? Are you going to publish this in a book or?
Yes.
Oh, yay.
So I am currently working on writing my monograph. So which is a fancy academic way of saying the book that will be my PhD. So I hope to also write, more specialized, kind of niche down academic articles about this. I'm saying hoping because I haven't done it yet, so I don't want to say that I'm going to do something that I haven't actually been able to do. But I'm going to be publishing this as a PhD thesis, meaning that it's got to be turned in and it's got to be assessed, and then hopefully it passes when that time comes, and then it will be accessible. But what's really interesting is that I don't know where I'm going to end up with this, but at the current moment in time, and I'm like, for those of you listening, you can't see this, but Kim and Johanna can see this, that I'm like looking off screen because I've printed out all of my sketches and I've literally, put them up with the tape. I've taped them up on my wall. So I'm literally sitting here looking at all of them. There are several ones that I would like to take a second look at, but you only have so much time and you've got to just kind of accept the fact that you're maybe not going to be 100% finished with something, but you kind of just got to stop at a certain point. But I've finished pretty much all of the ones that I'm going to be able to finish, besides one, because funny story, I was going through all of my files the other week and I suddenly realized that there was, of course, one piece that I didn't have that high res image of. So it kind of just got lost in the mush. And right before I logged on to talk to you guys today, I got an email back from the photographer who said that the image was now in the folder. So hope there might be another sketch coming that I haven't had, like I haven't had the time to take a look at the source material yet, but there might be one. But I can give you guys a little bit of a somewhat of a result that isn't really a result yet, if you want.
Yeah.
And that is that I won't be able to give you exact figures because I haven't been able to count them all yet, but I have an approximation. And I would say that, well, first of all, I've been going through all of these already existing drawings, and I've been able to approximate that we have already existing drawings in multiple versions or just one of at least 30 catalog numbers. So at least 30 fragments,
Nice.
give or take a couple. In total, as of, okay, this is going to get complicated real quick, but let's see it. In total, as of 1965, there were at least 96 catalog numbers of tapestry fragments from the Oseberg burial. So of those 96, we have about 30 sketches, give or take a couple. Haven't been able to double check that number with our current number because the way the catalog system is, it always changes. But let's say we have somewhere around 90 at least catalog numbers of fragments. I have been able to attempt to sketch at least 70 of them. The reason that number is different from the 96 one is because there are a fair few of them where I've opened the image and I've just been like, I've been able to say immediately, it's not going to be possible. I'm literally just looking at the equivalent of 1,200-year-old cotton swabs, pretty much. Like, I'm not going to get anything out of this. And there are also a couple of unfortunate situations where during kind of a reorganization and accuracy project, not accuracy, what am I trying to say? But like double checking that everything is supposed to be where it is. Project
verification.
Thank you. That's the word. Verification project in 2007 to 2008, I think. We're not talking about many here, but there are at least a couple fragments that are mentioned in notes and earlier publications that we haven't been able to find.
Oh,
that they've gotten lost somewhere.
Ooh.
Or something happened to them. We're just talking about one or two here, but still,
thank goodness. But
yeah, but that unfortunately that can happen. But okay, so we got 96 catalog numbers. Then we have give or take 30 existing drawings. I've been able to sketch probably around 70 of those. And out of those 70, at this point in time, I can say that I have sketches that are clear enough to look at without them just being just blobs of color of about 44 of them.
Nice.
Give or take a couple. So, it still pales a little bit in comparison to the amount of catalog numbers in 1965. But what's cool about it, but what's cool about it is that means I still haven't been able to kind of track down exactly which fragments we're talking about. But that means that there are at least 12, if not 13, 14, 15 fragments that have never been drawn before that I've been able to illustrate.
Oh, that's so exciting.
That's neat.
That's pretty cool. I think that's actually pretty cool. That makes me a little bit giddy to think about.
Yeah.
I'd be like,
so we'll get to actually see your work one day. And, and when we do articles, we'll get to see it even sooner, right?
Yeah. Oh. I find that a lot of fun. I think that's cool because that hasn't really been that hasn't been what's been on the forefront of my mind when I've been drawing this. But then when I was
you're getting there.
Yeah, but now that I've like finished all of them, made sure that, everything has like a measurement indication and they all have, edges so that you're not just looking at, a random bunch of doodles. It's been fun to go like, oh wait, I've actually drawn fragments that no one's ever drawn before. Hang on, wait, that's kind of neat.
I can't wait to see them.
Yeah.
Oh, don't you worry. I'll be happy. I am all about open source and open access.
Yay.
So don't you worry. And I've made sure to sign all of them actually, because I realized that
smart.
The two most prolific artists that have drawn most of the existing drawings, Sophie Kraft and Mary Storm, they usually signed all of their drawings. So I was like, wait, but then I have to do that. So I've had the pleasure of, spending a bunch of work hours going Havgar 2025 or Havgar 2023, which is fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
So do you have like an idea of when it might be out? Or is that a mean thing to ask a PhD
I was just
student?
don't keep us waiting too long.
Well, I do have a deadline, if that's what you're asking.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. That deadline, though, is a bit in flux just because I've been on sick leave a little bit. And that means that it gets pushed. So I don't know exactly right now when it will be. But sometime next fall.
Oh, that's quick. Yeah.
Yeah, that is
well
quick.
For us. I know it's not for you. It's like when a woman is pregnant and everybody's like, oh, that went by fast. It's like, yeah, not for me. It didn't.
Or it's like writing a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, fast. The thing is like, I'm a bit scared about it. Actually, it does actually seem fast. And I don't mind that, besides the fact that, in that time span, I'm going to have to write 250 coherent pages of research. And I haven't done that before to that extent. So, but we're getting there.
That's what your advisors are for.
Exactly.
To help get you through that.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's going to be great. And I think, even though that's going to be the finished piece, I hope, I don't know, I don't want to promise too much, but I hope I'll be able to share at least some in, smaller contexts before that.
That would be so great.
Yeah,
I would love that.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I think it's, the reason I did this is so that people would be able to look at them.
Right. Yeah. Cool. That's a great place to wrap it up. And we'll want you definitely need to come on again once you get that all done and your dissertation is out and you're
if
free.
Not before.
Yeah. Happy to come on whenever.
Okay, cool.
Excellent.
You guys let me know. This is one of the best parts of my job, is to be able to talk to other people about it, to be completely honest. So
yeah, it's really neat in this time to be able to do things like podcasts and I don't know, write blogs or whatever way that you can talk about that thing that you love so much, or find groups online that are totally into this one thing that you really love. That's kind of niche, and it's cool. Well, thank you so much once again.
Yes, thanks,
you are
Margaret.
so welcome, and thanks for having me on again. It was a real pleasure.
Great. Thanks for listening. You can find Johanna at johannawittenberg.com, where you'll find a free short story, a prequel to her Norse Queen series. And you can find me, K.S., at ksbarton.com, where you can also find a free short story from me, a prequel to my Norse family series. See you next time.